The freezing wind of the North Sea whipped against the walls of the Uppsala University laboratory, where Dr. Einar Solberg, an archaeologist specializing in Nordic material culture, spent his days surrounded by fragments of history. For 2 decades, Einar had dedicated his life to dismantling the romantic and brutal myths surrounding the Vikings, a people popular history remembered only for their non-existent helmet horns and bloody raids. However, his latest project, the comprehensive analysis of findings from a previously unexplored elite cemetery in Gotland, was about to reveal customs so extravagant and complex that they would shake the foundations of what Europe thought it knew about its dreaded raiders. Give it a like, subscribe, and share. Let's begin. The project centered on the tomb of a Jarl, Earl or chieftain, from the 10th century, a man who, according to his burial kit, had traveled from the Mediterranean to Novgorod. But it was neither the Byzantine gold nor the richly crafted weapons that captured Einar's attention, but the evidence of their daily routines and cultural obsessions. What Einar and his young team were about to reveal was not the madness of war, but the madness of vanity, hygiene, and self-medication of a culture that in its peaceful moments was as extravagant as any decadent court. 1. The obsession with cleanliness and extreme vanity. The popular image of the Viking as a filthy, bearded savage contrasted brutally with the Gotland findings. Analysis of organic remains in elite tombs revealed an obsession with cleanliness that surpassed most of their European contemporaries. Personal grooming kits. In 90% of adult male tombs in Gotland, personal grooming kits were found that were as essential to the Viking as his sword. These kits included bronze or iron tweezers for hair removal, a common practice among men and women, fine-edged razor blades, spoon-shaped ear cleaners, and most surprisingly, double-sided combs with fine teeth to remove lice and nits, a testament to their concern for social status through neatness. Men shaved the back of their necks and trimmed their beards geometrically, not allowing the wild hairiness that later iconography had assigned to them. Weekly baths and the sauna. Unlike the bathing habits of most Christian kingdoms of the time, where water was considered a luxury or even a source of disease, the Vikings maintained a strict regime of weekly bathing. Remains of ash and steam in communal houses, the hus, confirmed the regular use of saunas, badstova, where hot water was poured over heated stones. This was not just an act of hygiene, it was a social and religious ritual performed on Saturdays, bath day, a custom so ingrained that it was documented with astonishment by the English chronicler John of Wallingford in the 11th century, who complained that the Vikings wrought havoc on the marriages of nobles because English women found the invaders excessively clean, well-combed, and fragrant. The warrior's blush. Chemical analysis of pigments found in small ceramic bowls revealed a custom that blurred gender lines, the use of makeup and dyes. High-status men often used kohl, a black powder based on antimony or carbon, around their eyes to increase contrast and protect vision against the glare of the sea or snow, a custom borrowed from Byzantium or Kievan Rus. In addition, lactic acid and iron oxide were used to create a reddish blush applied to the cheeks, not to imitate fragility, but to symbolize the vitality of youth and the fury of battle. Berserker. The Viking warrior, before boarding his draka, groomed himself like a noble from the Silk Road. 2. The hallucinogenic pharmacy and the magic of death. The most disturbing and unknown aspect of Viking culture revealed by Einar was their intimate and deliberate relationship with psychoactive substances, not only for combat, but also for mourning and magic. The secret of the Berserkers, the state of irrational frenzy of the Berserkers, bear warriors, and the Ulfhedna, wolf warriors, was long attributed only to divine wrath or psychotic dissociation. However, analysis of dental remains and organic residues in ritual bowls showed the presence of alkaloids derived from various fungi and plants. The most consistently found substance was the Amanita muscaria mushroom, the red-capped mushroom with white spots, rich in the toxin muscimol, which causes delirium, changes in size perception, and a total loss of the sense of pain and fear. The Berserkers were not simply angry. They were ceremonially self-medicated to achieve a state of battle trance that made them immune to pain and increased their aggression, a practice that society tolerated for its military effectiveness but kept outside the main religious cult. The beer of mourning, la Sorgöl. The ritual of death and mourning was perhaps the most emotional and psychedelic custom found. Einar's team discovered small clay pots with residues of ceremonial beer, erföl, mixed with deadly nightshade, Atropa belladonna, and black henbane, Hyoscyamus niger, both highly toxic and hallucinogenic plants that cause visions, euphoria, and amnesia. This beer of mourning, Sorgöl, was consumed during elite funerals, erföl, a practice intended to facilitate communication with the deceased and mitigate the pain of grief through the radical alteration of consciousness. The vision of death was not an end, but a transition that required the perceptual alteration of the living. The magic of the Seiðkonur. The Seiðkonur, women practitioners of Seiðr magic, a type of Nordic shamanism, used a combination of cannabis, hemp, and burned hay in their ritual chambers. Analysis of the hair remains of a female shaman in Gotland showed high levels of cannabis metabolites. These women not only used cannabis to enter a divinatory trance, Seiðr, but also as a form of sedative and analgesic during the long periods of fasting and isolation required for magical practice. Self-medication with substances was an integral component of their spirituality and their medicine. Give it a like, subscribe, and share. 3. The game of appearance and extravagant social stratification. Viking society, although decentralized and often anarchic, was extremely stratified and relied on appearance to project power. What they found was a world of material snobbery worthy of any royal court. Modified teeth and identification. One of the most shocking and wildest discoveries was the evidence of elective dental modification. Bone remains of 5 elite warriors in Gotland and 7 in Sweden showed intentional horizontal grooves carved into the upper front incisors. These marks, made with an abrasive instrument, probably a stone or flint, had no practical function. They were purely aesthetic and status-based. It is believed that these marks, which were often filled with dark or even red pigments, iron oxide, served as a military or clan identification system, a dental tattoo that announced the warrior's ferocity and status, terrifying their enemies with an otherworldly smile. It was a form of biological propaganda. The value of color and imported clothing, contrary to the image of simple drab wool clothing, dyes and color were crucial for social stratification. Analysis of textile fibers showed that elite Vikings paid exorbitant prices for expensive dyes like Tyrian purple, imported from Byzantium, cochineal red, of Arabic origin, and brilliant copper-based greens. A man of status not only dressed in silk, imported from the Silk Road, but ensured that his cloak was the brightest and most visible color possible to stand out at the assembly, thing, or in battle. Textile vanity was a sign of wealth that demonstrated a jarl's ability to control vast trade routes. Jewelry as currency of respect. Jewelry was not merely decorative, it was a saving system and a certificate of power. Silver arm rings and gold neck rings were worn to display accumulated wealth, but also served as fractional currency. Fragments were cut from the arm ring, hack silver, to make transactions. What Einar discovered was that the fashion of this jewelry was crucial for respect. A jarl had to flaunt foreign-style jewelry, Irish brooches, Russian glass beads, Frankish gold rings, to prove that his raiding and trading routes were the most extensive and successful. The adoption of foreign fashion was, in itself, a strategy of social dominance. 4. Folk medicine versus the superstition of fluids. The Viking approach to medicine and healing was a baffling mix of advanced botanical knowledge and a deep superstition that bordered on the irrational. Fjolkingi and herbs. The herbal knowledge of the Vikings was remarkable. Remains of plantain, yarrow, and mugwort were found in settlements, all herbs with anti-inflammatory and antiseptic properties used to clean and treat battle wounds. Women, healers, and sorceresses were often the keepers of this pharmacological knowledge, which gave them considerable social power. Healing by fluids, Lagaldr. However, this botanical science coexisted with the belief in magical healing through bodily fluids and rituals. Runic enchantments, Galdr, were often carved onto bone or wood and submerged in water that was drunk in the hope of healing. But most surprising was the evidence of energy transfer rituals involving breast milk, even for adult males. And in the case of deep wounds, the application of fermented urine, rich in ammonia for its disinfectant properties. Christian chroniclers of the time considered this practice the height of pagan barbarism, but for the Viking, it was the magical transfer of life force from one body to another. 5. the cult of cats and sacred geometry. Finally, the Gotland discoveries revealed a spiritual dimension of Viking culture that contradicted its reputation as practitioners of blood sacrifices. It was the madness of animal love and the obsession with form. The sacred cat. Cats were revered animals in Viking culture, associated with the goddess Freyja, the deity of love, beauty, and Seiðr magic. Analysis of companion animal remains in elite burials showed a high prevalence of domestic cat burials, often adorned with amber collars and silk ribbons. In some cases, remains of cats carefully wrapped in wool were found, placed near the head of the high-status woman. This devotion was not just affection. It was a religious practice intended to ensure Freyja's magical protection for the deceased. The Viking, the monastery raider, carried a feline amulet into the afterlife. Draka geometry and objects. Archaeologists already knew that the Draka, longship, was a marvel of naval engineering, but Dr. Vogel discovered that the geometry of everyday objects was not accidental. The braiding patterns on rings, the proportions of shields, and the curves of horn cups were designed according to a sacred geometry based on the golden ratio and the proportions of the human body. This implied that aesthetic perfection was not just a matter of taste, but a way to tune the objects to the cosmic harmony of Asgard and Midgard. Beauty was a form of power. Dr. Einar Solberg presented his findings at a congress in Copenhagen, and the reaction was shock, followed by a profound historical readjustment. The Vikings' craziest customs revealed a civilization of unsustainable contrasts. They were warriors who plucked their eyebrows before battle, shamans who intoxicated themselves to speak with the dead, and nobles who wore makeup while carrying mummified cats to their graves. What they found beneath the soil of Gotland was proof that the Viking was not the monolithic brute that history had made him out to be, but a complex and deeply human being, whose pursuit of power and status manifested in extravagant vanity, rigorous hygiene, and an uninhibited relationship with altered consciousness. Their true madness was not in the raiding, but in the aesthetic and spiritual refinement they used to justify their dominance. Give it a like, subscribe, and share.